morning and welcome. I suppose I want to go back to early intervention, and John, you said that when you were comparing Ireland to other countries that we were middling. So I'm just wondering, does that mean that some children get early intervention and others don't, or just what that middling means, or it's just that everybody gets something but it's not great, or just to expand on that. It's also, I think, estimated that there are about 5,000 deaf people in Ireland, but I'm just wondering, without proper data, I mean, how does any government plan anything? And do you have suggestions on how best to actually collect that data? I mean, is it through the census, or is there another mechanism? I'm just wondering on that. I know you've mentioned there proposals you've sent to the Department of Education, and I just wonder if you would expand on those. You've mentioned a home tuition scheme, and I'm just wondering as well what your opinion is on education. Like you've talked about deaf schools, and there's 3 in Ireland, and how that gives children the opportunity to learn ISL from an early age. But then from the UNCRPD perspective, or the Convention on the Rights of the Child, they talk a lot about inclusive education, and just wonder where it sits with that. Like I was a teacher before I was a TD, and I did teach some students who were hard of hearing and in the mainstream. But it would be interesting to know, as you said, the data shows that a lot of them don't progress to university if they have if they're deaf or hard of hearing. And we would have argued before that universities or further education needs to be universally designed to accommodate everybody's educational needs. But that doesn't seem to be happening. And actually, I was only just talking to someone last week in my constituency. This woman is hard of hearing, but she was coming in to talk to me about her nephew, who's also hard of hearing. And he went to mainstream school. He qualified, then went on to university, qualified in something, modern technologies to do with climate change and environmental issues. So you'd think there would be loads of jobs there. He had a job. But he had to give up his job. He's now on disability because he was answering phones. And now it's possible he didn't inform his employer that he was hard of hearing. I'm not sure. I can't say that until I get talking to him himself. And if he did, well, the employer had a responsibility then to ensure that they put in place, whatever accommodations he needed. But it's possible he didn't, because there seems to be still a little bit of a stigma to admitting maybe that you have are hard of hearing. So I suppose I would, if he's willing, maybe link him in with your organisation, because I really think this is a young man who needs support, and I would be, as his family are concerned about his well-being, because he is highly qualified, should be in the workplace, but is now actually taking an option of claiming disability, and it's not good for anyone. And just one last thing as well. I mean, you're talking about the Department of Education not engaging with you. I mean, I have submitted several questions on why people who qualify from the excellent course in Trinity with a degree in ISL are not considered capable of qualifying as a teacher. They're insisting that they need, like they may have ISL and another subject, but they're saying, oh, you need another one on top of that, that they're not recognising ISL as a subject. I think it should be a subject, not just on the LCA course, but it should be a subject in secondary school. But also then people who've qualified in that course should be deemed, that is a subject that they should be able to teach. But I get told, it's an issue for the Teaching Council, then I'm told, no, it's an issue for the curriculum development. So you're sent around in rings. So I'm just wondering if you're experiencing the same thing. So thank you.
And thank you for your questions. So in terms of where does Ireland compare with other countries, really that's my personal opinion. I'm assuming what I see from what I have seen in other countries. For example, here in Ireland we do have deaf teachers, but they're more like in a tokenistic role. Other countries have no deaf teachers. So around Europe, on a European level, I might be wrong, but I would say in terms of that provision of deaf teachers, Ireland is grading somewhere in the middle. Less than 10% of deaf children are born to deaf parents. Deaf parents already have ISL, so those children grow up fluent in ISL and have ISL access. and those parents are quite open-minded. Then we meet other parents who are very open-minded about learning ISL, a smaller percentage. And we see that here. And then the home tuition scheme that we have here. Other countries I know around Europe don't have that at all, but we have it here. And as John Sherwin said, we need to upgrade the system of home tuition. It's pretty basic, the provision there. The home tuition scheme, a lot of deaf people don't want to do. They don't like that. There's management issues around it. The way the Department of Education runs the scheme, they give the finances to the parents then pay the fee to the home tutor. And that can be a complicated and challenging situation, timing, payments, keeping paperwork, and it's quite a burden for parents to run. Secondly, you gave us an example of someone you met last week. I have full sympathy with that young man. He has his qualification, a higher level qualification, and I know many other deaf people have gone through exactly the same situation. They have a degree, they have a qualification in a particular area, and we have some research on a European level called Designs, and it's available online. I could actually forward that to you after the meeting, and it compares Ireland with the rest of Europe. In terms of the sciences, there's quite a high level in secondary school, as in teaching science. And they're stuck in that environment. They can't move out of that. And a lot of that is down to employers' attitudes. Some deaf people don't want to disclose their disability or say that they are deaf. And as Elaine said, a lot of that is down to confidence. Elaine and I can't hide that we are deaf because we have to use sign language every day. So we are more confident in using sign language. I myself have gone to third level, but for others it can be a much more vague situation. And I think the IDS would be very happy to engage with that young man to see if they can offer some support. There's a lot of deaf people out there who are overqualified in the roles that they're in. Elaine, would you like to add? We assume we have 5,000 deaf ISL users in Ireland, and that's just through our own experience as well in networking within the community. That's what we see. But the census records do not match what we see. There's an issue with how the census has asked the question, do you speak another language other than English or Irish? So a lot of deaf people read that and related that to spoken language, and the answer to the question is no. Or a lot of deaf people perhaps didn't fill in the form at all. So the head of the house fills in the form and maybe they didn't fill it in correctly and left out the answer to that question. So we feel the census results and we don't match what we see happening on the ground, and we've asked the CSO to speak to us on that. In Scotland, they have an excellent question on their census.
I'd just like to mention, we mentioned earlier about building confidence, and we're talking about identity and maybe feeling if you're deaf or hard of hearing, maybe you're labelled or there's a certain stigma to that. And a lot of people in the deaf community would have those kind of identity issues because when they grow up, they're as if trained to be like a hearing person or not to sign, or, you know, it can be quite difficult growing up when you're struggling with that kind of identity, trying to accept that identity, when there's that attitude within society where they possibly look down on deaf people or patronise deaf people or think it's something that they need to solve. The IDS does have an advocacy service to empower deaf people to develop their own identity and to embrace and be proud of being deaf and hard of hearing, and that they want to sign. It's important to empower them through translation, through education, so that they can accept their identity. And as you mentioned, the young man that you mentioned, we'd be happy to engage with him. There's a Pubbo Career Project, which hopefully will have more funding in the future to assist us in our work, to help deaf people become, you know, better trained for job skills, to gain better employment, as John Bosco mentioned, possibly someone who's been out of work or has a degree but doesn't have work to match that degree, or is overqualified, or hasn't had the opportunity to really excel in the workplace. It's important to build that confidence, to make sure that they know that they can achieve, because often there will be an attitude there feeling, oh, because I'm deaf, I can't do this, I can't do that. But it's important to make sure we're there to guide, and how do you teach and how do you build those skills and build that confidence. And also to make employers know that deaf people can work in the workplace, or deaf or hard of hearing. Say, for example, or even a hard of hearing person who has never been engaged with the deaf community before, has only ever been mainstreamed. It's important that they know that those services are available for them within the community.
Just to clarify there, the advocacy service and the deaf career service that we can offer and can assist that young man are unfunded and funded through fundraising efforts, which takes away from our ability to actually do this kind of policy work. So that's part of what we'd be looking for under core funding. When you ask, is the early intervention middling, or what is the service like? I mean, the early intervention at present is the home tuition scheme, and as we said earlier, it's dysfunctional. There's quality control problems. There is a range of issues with the scheme that we have put in a comprehensive proposal to the Department of Education about how to address, and we have had no response to that since 2018. Recently, we did a submission to the CSO when they were looking at how to update the questions for the next census, and we are engaging with them on a range of improvements there that make the questions clearer to ascertain exactly what the size of the deaf community is in Ireland. And when you ask about, the directions for deaf students, like inclusive education or deaf schools or mainstreaming and all of these options, and I suppose wondering what's best, like, we don't have an answer for that. And again, it's coming back to that research-driven situation. And of course, the whole landscape of education is changing and has been changing since John Bosco's time in school. And so the situation needs to be research driven to figure out what's the best. But we would also say the best for one person is not the best for another person, and what there needs to be is choice. And at the moment those choices aren't there. And what we're seeing is the lack of progress through to university, and that's starting when deaf people are marginalised from birth. That process of not getting into university and not getting jobs that go further than low paid. And as John says, deaf people are working in jobs they're overqualified for because there's a glass ceiling there related to stigma.
And I'd just like to add to that, when talking about inclusion or inclusive education or inclusion. I'm a full supporter of universal design. I think it's great. And at the moment, there's some academic research about the word inclusive education. And that's very much focused on the physical environment, such as ramps, doors. What does the physical environment look like? But there's not a realization, or they forget that inclusive also means experience and skills. Have you thought about language access as part of your inclusive education? And a lot of the time it's not. Or have you thought about bringing in an interpreter? For example, when a teacher turns to write on the blackboard or a whiteboard in school, they're talking directly to the blackboard. They're faced away from the students. The students are often behind them. Or they walk around the classroom. They're moving constantly. Elaine spoke about the social and emotional development, or someone's whispering or laughing or joking in class with their friends behind the teacher's back, or they're chatting about what they did at the weekend. And I remember myself a long time ago reading about deaf children in England, or deaf school in England, and school friendships. And they often stopped at the school gate. And I thought, wow, that's a powerful sentiment. And it's just so important when you think of children, even if someone's invited for the weekend or birthday, or you're invited over to play in someone's house or watch a film or something like that. And often they forget to ask the deaf student, not because they didn't like the child, but they simply forgot because they just assumed when they communicated that everybody knew, but no one specifically told the deaf child or took the time to tell them. So it's quite a powerful, if you can imagine, and it's such a huge emotional impact that would have on someone. So inclusion often, it's just physical. It doesn't often involve language.